What's up? I'm Coach Stacy, and today I want to talk a little bit about our boxer stance or our fighting stance. For me, I come from more of a martial art background. I've done a little bit of boxing, but my stance is going to be a little bit different. But in general, let's just take a look at, we'll call it a fighter's stance, okay? So I'm going to give you a couple of tips, and then we're going to use this line just so you can see, you can sort of see what I'm trying to show you when I talk about lines. But the first thing is, in general, you want to have a balanced stance. You want to have a stance that you can move in, and you need to feel pretty comfortable. That might look slightly different from person to person. I don't think that you're going to find a bunch of people that all look exactly the same. It really depends on who you are, how tall you are, what your technique is, what you like to do, all those different types of components. So there's no real exact perfect stance, okay? It also depends on what types of techniques you're doing. So if you're doing a lot of kicking, your stance is going to be more narrow. And if you're boxing and you're just doing a lot of upper body stuff, your stance is going to be a bit wider. So in general, the thing to focus on is having balance to your stance and feeling comfortable, like you can move in that stance very quickly. I would say those are the two most important things that you need to focus on when really honing in on your stance. So if I tell you some techniques and some tips and some really specific things and it starts to make your stance feel weird, pull it back from that and just really start to feel it in your own body and find what feels comfortable and then go from there, because we don't want weird things happening. We want to have a stance that feels natural and comfortable. So first off, when you look at me from the side, if my feet come closer together this way, this is more narrow than if I were to come out this way and get a deeper stance, right? So this is deeper, meaning that I have a much wider base. If you think about a tripod, if I was a boxer and my stance is this wide, if someone hits me, my leg is a tripod and it gives me the ability to sort of recover, versus if I were standing in a more narrow stance, if somebody hits me, I'm going to be knocked off that center a lot easier. Again, picture a tripod. The wider the feet are, the more balanced and stable that tripod's going to be. If it's more narrow and someone bumps it, it's going to knock over, okay? So we have a sort of narrow stance, a little bit, sort of different, moderate, and then you've got a more super wide or sort of deep stance, okay? So deep, narrow. Then we have the width of the stance, so how wide. In general, you need to be somewhere around at least shoulder width apart. So my feet are going to be shoulder width apart, versus I don't want them super wide and I don't want them standing on a tightrope where they're not wider than my shoulders, okay? So those are the two sort of components of your stance, right? So you've got the width, how far apart my feet are, and then sort of the depth, how far back it goes. All right, now when we take a look at this line, a lot of times what I see is people doing one of two things in their stance. One is standing completely sideways, and this makes it extremely difficult to hit and do techniques forward, because when I do this, my hips max out. So I always tell like kids that, picture headlights on your hips. If there were headlights here and I turn to try to punch, I max out right about here. I can't get my hips all the way forward without my knee hurting, okay? So this stance is really incorrect. I'm moving sideways this way, and I don't really want to do that. The other is probably just having a little bit of a super narrow stance in general. So I might be a little bit not completely sideways, but I might be like this, but I'm still sort of standing on the tightrope, right? So we've adjusted it so you can move your hips forward, but by the time I turn that hip to do a cross, man, I really feel like I'm kind of having to balance from side to side. So this is still too narrow. Now, what you really want is you need something that's a bit wider. You need your feet to be on each side of this tightrope, shoulder width apart. Now, in fighting stance, I don't want to stand squared off to somebody. And what squared off means is that my shoulders and my hips are square to you. So I don't want to stand like this, right? Because that means I'm leaving all these openings, and it's a lot harder to defend myself if I put my hands up. I'm still quite open in here. What I want to be able to do is turn my body, is stand in a square stance, but I'm going to turn my feet, slightly. I wouldn't even say it's, I don't want to give you certain degrees because it's going to look different, but I need to turn my feet slightly away so that then I can turn my hips away from you, okay? I can still move back to this position, but I don't want to be square to you. So I want to use my upper body to turn away. So by the time my hands are up here, now I'm a harder target, right? So in order to get over here, you're going to have to do some hooks or pivots, or you're going to have to move around me. So I'm not standing square to the bag, and I'm not standing sideways. I want something that's kind of comfortable. Now, in a boxer stance, technical boxer stance, they're going to tell you to put your top toe and line it up with your back heel, right? Just like this. And then I'm going to get that depth for my stance. So this is sort of you'll see this as a technical term. Personally, to me, it's still too narrow, but that's because we're kicking. So if I wanted to do a quick kick, I feel like my stance doesn't give me enough balance for that. So usually I'm probably right on each side of this tape, kind of comfortably. Again, the key is to feel comfortable and like you can move. So I want to make sure that once I'm in this stance, my feet aren't going to be pointed towards you. They're going to be just a little bit off. That gives me, I'm going to use my feet, move them off. I'm going to use my upper body and my shoulders to come away from you. So now from here, I can turn my hips all the way as I lift and pivot my foot, and I turn that hip into you. So I've got full movement. I can move this way. I can turn away from you. I've got pretty good range of motion all the way around. Okay. So you want to find that space for yourself. Honestly, if I were just to walk up regularly, put one foot in front of the other, stand balanced, then I need to turn my shoulders away and bring my feet just a little bit with me. That's pretty comfortable. That got me there pretty easily. So this is really where I want to be. So if my bag were in front of me, if I'm practicing on a bag, it's sitting right here, and this is my stance. This gives me the ability to move my legs very easily. I can turn my hips. I feel pretty comfortable and balanced. Okay. The last thing that I want to talk about is the movement in the legs, or what I want my legs to be doing. A lot of times what I see is the knees locked out, right? Or the knees just sort of standing straight. If I am standing straight, I don't have the mobility that I need. I need to be able to have some shock. I need to be able to move up and down. If I wanted to start a race, if, you know, like when you were a kid and you're like, let's race, the kids generally get down here and they're ready to like pretend like they're going to race. A racing starting position isn't going to be standing tall like this. This is not how a person starts a race, right? So they are completely bent. If I am bent, that means I can explode out of that, right? So I can't get all the way bent in my stance, but I do need to have my knees bent and comfortable. So if I'm working my stance correctly, my quads are going to be burning. I'm going to feel those calves working, right? So I need to be here so that I can explode forward. If my legs are locked out, it makes it a lot harder to actually make that movement, okay? So the last piece I want to say is, when I see a lot of people punching in this straight sort of stance, what ends up happening is when we go for a cross, we end up lifting this back foot off the ground. So we're hooking and we're crossing, but instead of being bent and turning into it, we're kind of lifting off because we don't have anywhere else to go, right? So you're at your max capacity in terms of explosion. So the only way that you can build power is by moving your body forward, right? So instead of standing like this, you've got to get your knees bent and comfortable. Your heels, when I say they're off the ground, I don't mean it has to always be like this. You just have to have, they're sort of hovering. The weight is in the balls of your feet so that you're ready to move and that you're ready to pivot this back foot off. So when I throw that cross, bang, I've got some power, but I am centered. My head has not moved forward, right? So boom, I am dropping into that, and I'm sending power from my lower legs and I'm giving myself some explosive power from the bend in my legs. So again, just to recap, with a really nice stance, you need to make sure that you are comfortable and balanced. First and foremost, if you start training and things start to feel super weird, or you feel unbalanced, there needs to be an adjustment. The other is making sure that your knees are bent and you are comfortable and you have some room to explode your power forward. or side to side. You need to make sure that you have your feet wide, so they don't want to be on a tightrope. And you also need to make sure that you have the ability to turn those hips all the way around to the bag, to your opponent, wherever it is. You got to be able to turn those hips. Okay. The last thing I want to say about it is, I did mention if you feel uncomfortable, but sometimes when you're doing something right, it's going to feel uncomfortable. So if you have trained the wrong thing or the wrong technique for a long period of time, and now you are switching and doing the right thing, it's going to feel weird and it's going to feel wrong until you actually train it and make it right. That's one of the reasons why it's great to use a mirror or be able to see yourself in the position, in the correct position. So if you can see the alignment and you can look at yourself sort of how I'm showing here with a piece of tape or whatever it is, if you see that, and then you can kind of practice moving in it or whatever you'd like to do, but you can see it, you could say, that does feel weird, but it looks right, right? Once you know it looks right and it feels a little bit weird, move in it until it starts to feel natural, because that is going to be correct. So it might feel comfortable to be doing it wrong, but if you watch yourself doing it right, then you could say, oh, when my body is in this posture, this is how it feels inside. And now I know what the correct feeling should feel like. Okay? So practice your stance, see if you can get a piece of tape, work it, look at it, and feel it. And then I'll see you on the floor soon.